Well, greetings and welcome back to our study in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. This week we are in 2nd Thessalonians chapter 2. And 2nd Thessalonians 2 starts off with Paul talking to the Thessalonians about Jesus' return. Now, this was a major topic in the first book. We spent a significant amount of time talking about what Jesus' return meant. If you want to see that video, it is the video on 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, part 2, where I took the entire video to talk about what it means for Jesus to return. And obviously, Paul's message didn't quite hit home the way he wanted to, because he's restating it. He's coming back to this a second time, telling the Thessalonians about the day of the Lord. He understands that they are upset, that they are troubled, bothered by what it means for Jesus to return. There is some debate in scholarly circles about what it might have been that triggered the Thessalonian response to Paul, why they don't quite understand. One of the leading theories seems to be that maybe there was a letter come through that was supposedly addressed from Paul that talked differently than the way Paul did. I don't know that I'm quite willing to accept that. I don't know that that we necessarily have to go that far. It could be that they misunderstood what Paul's letter meant. It could be that there was a second letter that came through, but it does seem a little strange. It would have to have been, if there was another letter that was supposedly from Paul or an apostle, it had to have come between the time that Paul sent Timothy the first time and the time when Timothy returned to them with 1 Thessalonians, because otherwise Timothy would have been able to handle the problem and said, no, this letter didn't come from Paul. He would have talked to me about this. No, he would have sent a letter to me personally. He knows I'm here. He would have addressed something. In other words, Timothy would have been able to handle a letter. So this must have been something that came about between Timothy's first visit and Timothy's second visit with 1 Thessalonians. If in fact there was a real letter, it could be that Paul was just simply addressing them, saying, hey, we don't want anything to dissuade you from what we've said. We don't want any potential hangups on what it means for Jesus to return. And then he goes on this topic about this man of lawlessness, this person who is being held back. And this is really ambiguous. This is one of those times, I like what Gordon Fee says about this. We can't know a lot about this passage because the Thessalonians knew about this. In other words, the Thessalonians knew what Paul was talking about, so he didn't have to burden them with a lot of description. But because Paul didn't burden them with a lot of description on this, we now don't understand as much about what he's saying, what he's talking about. Now, that's important, because modern descriptions of 2 Thessalonians 2 often take this passage and they lump it together with the beasts of Revelation, and they lump it together also with the word Antichrist found in 1 John. So those three passages come together. 2 Thessalonians 2, Revelation, I believe it's like 16, that talks about the beasts, and then the passage in 1 John where he talks about the spirit of Antichrist. And all three of those get lumped together to form this imaginative character called the Antichrist, who Paul seems to be talking about. Now, a lot of that, though, isn't found in the Bible. A lot of what people talk about is simply conjecture. It's just what they make up because it's a good story. A lot of Christian teachers want to know the end of the world, and so they put all of this story together in a way that fits them. a way that provides them a comfortable narrative for what they want to say. But it is not actually in the text in any way, shape, or form. Paul does not mention the beast or the Antichrist. He talks about this lawless one, and we're not even sure it's really a person. There's masculine nouns mixed with neuter nouns, so we don't know exactly how he's talking about this entity. I'm going to use that word. We don't know how he's talking about this entity. We don't know exactly what he means to say. It does seem like either Jesus or the Holy Spirit for Paul is holding back this entity in some way and will release the entity, but that does not mean that what some Christians will say about the Antichrist is accurate. This passage can very well mean that there is something holding back evil, and that what it means to release that evil is not to release it onto the world, but to cease holding it back in a way that means to destroy it. In other words, when it is destroyed, when that lawless entity, that lawless one, is destroyed, then Jesus will return. Not as in there has to be this tribulation time. Again, people read that into this passage because of Matthew 24. But Matthew 24 does not talk about the stuff that Paul is talking about here. And Paul does not here talk about the stuff that Matthew 24 talks about. They are different passages with their own context, their own reasons behind them. And what Paul is trying to tell the Thessalonians is, hey, don't worry about this. It's not going to play out in a way that is negative for you. You are going to be okay. Jesus is coming to protect and hold you up. The idea is that there are going to be things in the world that are meant to deceive you. There are times in the world where Satan's work is to deceive Christians with power, with signs, with wonders. Okay, we understand that, but Christ is going to take care of you. Don't fall for these tricks. Don't fall for Satan when Satan says you need power, you need political power, you need some sort of influence or authority. Don't fall for Satan's tricks when Satan is saying, hey, you missed Jesus. Because we know where Jesus is. Jesus is found among us in the love of the church. Jesus is found when we live out his commands. That's what Paul is trying to say. There are deceptions. There are all of this. There is destruction. But when we go down to verse 11, this is why God will send them an influence that will mislead them. The idea is that the people outside of the church have to worry. God is going to allow something to come into their world. And again, I don't like the active language for God here. It's not exactly accurate. In Hebrew, there's this thing called the divine passive, where things are attributed to God because God is authoritative. God has authority. And so the idea is that God allows it more than God is actually actively sending this. But God is allowing all of this to happen on the outside world. All of this will show people's hearts, the deception, the corruption. It shows people's hearts. It shows their character. When they can't see the difference in character between Jesus and Satan, well, that's showing what kind of character they have and what kind of commitment they have. You, though, shouldn't be deceived. You should be the people who follow Jesus. And because you follow Jesus, Paul is going to close this out with a thanksgiving. We thank God for you. We thank God for what's going on among you. God called you through our proclamation. You're not being taken in by this satanic lie that of power and corruption. You are holding true to the words of Jesus. The words of Jesus being those of the Sermon on the Mount, being humble, seeking after justice and mercy, and being peacemakers, and being what Paul would use in Galatians about the fruit of the Spirit, loving, kind, joyous, all those things that lead us towards God. You are doing those, and we are thankful for that. Don't let this outside influence mess with your head. Don't let this kind of stuff mess with you. Keep to what you know to be true. And in doing that, we can thank God for all of the things that you have done, all of the things that you are doing, and all the things you are going to do, because you are our people. And blessed be God because of that. And that's what Paul wants them to see. Not to be worried, not to be scared, not to fall off into these false wild goose chases of trying to find out who Satan or who this Antichrist figure is, not to follow wild goose chases into seeking power or dominance, but humbly following Jesus to live out a quiet life in your neighborhood where you can influence the world for Christ. That's what Paul has to say. And I hope that that has touched you. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And until we meet again, God bless.